All right. Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to another future-focused weekly update where I am hopefully keeping you 10 steps ahead at the intersection of business, technology, and human experience. I'm looking forward to today's. I've got a rundown of some really interesting topics that I guess I usually have a list of interesting topics, but I think you'll like this week's in particular. If you find this helpful, please, I'd encourage you to share it with a friend, give it a review, rating, all those good social things. And if this is your first time listening, I hope you enjoy it and find it valuable. Please send along feedback. You can also send along other articles you come across if you're curious, my thoughts, reactions to them, or just perspective. And I think that's it for the usual introductions on this. So with that, let's get straight into it. So the first one I wanted to talk about, if you have not heard, and I can't remember off the top of my head if it's been fully released yet or if it's still in beta with certain groups, but Copilot 2.0. So this is Microsoft's basically generative AI model. It's still a little confusing whether it's totally ingrained with OpenAI's GPT or if it's kind of now their own unique blend. That still isn't super clear to me on this. But the point is that Microsoft has their own generative AI model that is now being fully integrated into the Office 365 suite. Specifically, the business suite is where I see most people talking about it. And essentially what this does is it essentially allows you to have this fully integrated large language model to help automate all sorts of things, like help make my PowerPoints, help me draft this email, help me do this and that. And so I was watching a video of it this week of all the different functionality. And of course it was a bit of an ad, but this was done by, someone who doesn't work for Microsoft. So they had a little bit more of an objective view on it. But as they were describing this, some of the examples, I'll run you through some of the examples that I was watching them do. Now, one of them was, for their Excel and the ability to just look at these massive data files of all this stuff. And with the power of their Copilot, you can just ask whatever you want and it'll sort the data. It'll find the insights from the data. It'll lay it all out in a visual format that makes it nice for you. You don't have to go deal with other people to make that happen for you. And it can even write Python code so that you can actually, do even more dynamic stuff with this stuff. And leading up to all that, I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. I can see where this would be super helpful. But then it was like the catch at the end where the way it was positioned was, now with all this functionality, you'll no longer have a need for data analysts because you can do it all yourself. And I get really, really, really nervous when I hear AI products marketed this way. Now, again, this wasn't coming directly from Microsoft, but I did happen to go out and I saw some stuff coming from Microsoft that had a similar, maybe not quite so overt, basically kind of positioning this as, what do you need other people for? Our AI will take care of all this for you. And so then it showed another example of PowerPoint and how you could go into PowerPoint and you could just basically give it all the data and then say, now make me a deck that summarizes all of this stuff. And it creates this perfect, beautiful deck that you don't even need to do anything with. And it's so wonderful. And again, kind of positioning this as, who needs help when you can have AI in the power of your hands. And as I was watching this, I understand the flair of, could this be super helpful to people? Yes. As I talk with business leaders, though, where I think this marketing is misleading and concerning is that it gives the impression that AI will take care of everything for you. And so you won't really need the help of anyone, which unfortunately, no, not unfortunately, I guess fortunately, that's not actually how work happens at work. So let's just break this down, because to anybody who's listening to this, who may be running a business or in a senior leadership position going, oh, sweet, we have Copilot. So are you saying that we probably don't need to have an analytics team anymore because now we've got Copilot, it'll just take care of it for us? And if you're in that line of thinking, I would ask you to pull the reins back a bit, hit the brakes, because if you start going down this path, you're going to make some serious mistakes that are going to be very hard to untangle on the other side. And so let's just unpack some of these examples using real world data around this. So I've been heavily involved in people analytics and data analytics for quite some time. And, yes, are there always frustrations in an organization that said business stakeholder wants certain reports or wants certain things, and the analytics team can't deliver at the speed in which they want, and they get frustrated, and it creates this tension between the silos, and said business group goes, I just wish we could do this ourselves. It'd just be so much easier if we did this ourselves. And as a result, a lot of times what happens, said business organization goes out and hires their own analytics person and starts building their own analytics team to compensate for the gaps that the existing analytics team. And it becomes big and expensive, and people go, wow, this is such a waste. Why are we doing all this? And this is the kind of marketing that then Copilot 2.0 can capitalize on and go, isn't that so messy? Wouldn't it be great if you just had an AI bot that could do it for you? In theory, yes. In practice, though, it does not work this way. As somebody who has worked with said business leaders on a lot of these things where they go, I just need this report. What is often missing from that is the context of what do you need that report for? And are you aware of these other factors that may be influencing these? Like, if you truly have an analytics team that is nothing more than pencil pushers, that literally is just you send message, they send you report, you send message, they send report, then potentially could something like Copilot help? Sure. Unfortunately, I've never been in an organization where that's actually how things work, at least not if they're working well, because the way an analytics team should be set up is said business leader says, I need this report. Analytics team says, help me understand what you're trying to get out of that report. What do you think that report is going to tell you? This leads to a deeper discussion of said business leader is struggling with these issues and is trying to find these data points to validate whether they can improve on this. Analytics team goes, I hear what you're saying. Here's some of the challenges why what you think you're looking for might not get you what you need. What if we did something like this? And what if we factored these things in? Might that better help you make a decision? Okay, that's super productive. That actually gets you to a better result. It doesn't get you to a better result if said business leader goes, I want report. Now I'm just going to ask AI instead of analytics team. I get report. I make decision based on my own interpretation of this with zero understanding of all the other contextual data components. And now I make a decision. When it blows up, I get upset, but I don't even know how to solve it now because AI just gave me what I wanted. And this is the kind of stuff in some of the advisory work I'm doing that is happening in spades as people are starting to implement and become over dependent on AI, thinking, I already know everything. I just need someone to execute it. And the reality is you don't know everything, which is why AI can be very dangerous to your business. Now, are there instances where, yes, maybe just this specific report you need and the backlog of the analytics team because they're working on deeper things is really frustrating? And so, yes, generative AI helping you quick do an analysis on these numbers might be helpful. Sure. And that's where I think Copilot 2.0, these tools, they're fantastic and can be a great augmentation because no company can afford to have an analytics team with the size it would need to meet everyone's needs. And that's where AI can come in and help with some of this lower caliber, just robotic, like, I just need this. I just need this data reformatted this way. I just need to isolate this variable in here, which before you'd go pay way too much money for one of your top analytics people to be like, you want me to run an Excel report for you? This isn't a good use of my time. Great. That use case, fantastic. The use case of, I'm trying to do a business analysis of our last 3 years of data to identify trends and figure out where the market's moving and what things we've done that we've made mistakes. That's not something you want to go to Copilot for and just throw at a giant Excel database and go, give me the answer. And like I said, people are doing this left and right. Now, you may say, okay, well, that's an extreme example, but PowerPoint Obviously, that would be a piece of cake to use Copilot for. I would say not necessarily, because once again, let's use the example of said business leader, executive leader needs to give a presentation on some initiative. Okay, historically, the way it would work, executive would go to said team and say, hey, I need you to put together some slides on this initiative and get them back to me so that I can do the report out. If your business currently is structured where executive says, nobody asks any questions, somebody sends a bunch of finished slides back to said executive, executive goes and presents whatever their interpretation of that is, okay, that's a disaster waiting to happen. And in that instance, then yes, Copilot 2 might be great, but it's just great at making a big mess. How it should work would be business leader goes to their team, they know that's working on it, and says, I need to give a presentation on this. Can you pull together some slides on this? But I also need you to help me understand what this is and what are the key points and what are the things you need to make sure I highlight so I don't misrepresent this thing, so that I don't go promise the board that this is happening and then you go, you said what? Why would you tell them that? And that's what happens when said business leader goes, you know what? I don't need to tell my team. I don't need to worry about that. I'm just going to ask Copilot to look at this SharePoint document repository and pull together the top slides and format it for me. It doesn't have any context and it will lead to disaster. So, am I excited about where Copilot 2.0 is? Yes. Do I think it's extremely powerful and is going to solve a lot of really important problems for a lot of organizations? Yes, as do a lot of the large AI models. Do I think people are going to and already are making a lot of massive mistakes that are going to cost them millions, if not billions of dollars in the long run because they think this is the easy button? I already know it's happening, and I've already been called in to help clean up some of these messes after the damage has been done. And I can tell you it's costing exponentially more in time, money, resources than had they just done it right the first time. So just be careful with this stuff. But it's pretty cool. It's pretty integrated. If you haven't toyed around with it, if you have it in your organization, I highly encourage you to, because I know there's lots of times where you're doing this stuff and you're doing it very manually, and this can be super helpful, but with caution. All right, on the topic of generative AI and training data, I've talked, if you've listened to my stuff in the past, you have probably heard me, and I'll probably do another update on this at some point here in the future. But you've heard me talk about the fact that the training data, the data on how we actually train these models to do the things they do, the AI models are running out of it. The internet has been expunged of new information because they move so quick. And so as a result, a lot of companies are getting desperate for where do we get new data generated by humans? Where can we find new data that we can use to train our models? And as a result, sometimes companies are taking paths to try and get that data that might be upsetting to some people. And unfortunately, one of the ones that has caused a bit of a ruckus, if you're a LinkedIn user, I'm a big LinkedIn user. If you did not know, LinkedIn automatically opted every single one of its users in to using all of your data, all of your posts, everything you do to help train its AI. Now, before you have a visceral reaction, and I will walk you through how to turn it off if you want to, but I want to have an objective conversation about this. Because I know a lot of the people at LinkedIn, I know some of the people who are involved in some of these decisions and even what they're trying to accomplish with LinkedIn. And I think sometimes this can be painted as this very like sinister Dr. Evil in his, back room going, we're going to steal all the information so we can take over the world. It's not that. A lot of these tools are adding AI for the purpose of helping people. Like if you've used LinkedIn, there's like AI optimization of your profile, AI helping you generate posts, getting started with posts, AI helping you identify which jobs are going to be a good fit for you. So there's a lot of stuff that they're trying to do to help job seekers, job candidates, all this stuff, try and better pair things, companies matching people with talent, there are some good reasons that they're doing this stuff. So if you hear me say LinkedIn is now opting people in to gather your data to improve their AI, please don't jump to the nefarious, this is the Illuminati trying to take over the world. I don't think that's what's going on here. And in some ways, I think there might be some really strong cases for why you would want to leave it turned on. The reality is a lot of AI is garbage. And a lot of the reason AI is garbage is because a lot of the AI data AI is being trained on is generated by AI, or a lot of the data AI is being trained on is AI generated. So it's the snake eating its own tail. So to actually improve models, to make them better, to be more human-like, it needs real human data. And so I understand where LinkedIn's coming from, going, well, if we're trying to help improve people's posts, shouldn't we be training our AI on people's posts based on how they're performing and based on how people are engaging with it? If we're trying to better connect candidates with jobs, shouldn't we understand candidates' LinkedIn activity and what's interests them so that they can match it to job? Yes. So I don't think it's all nefarious. My issue with it, though, and I think this is a message to any tech companies out there, it's not a good look when you opt people in to using their personal data for training your AI without saying anything to them. Now, again, my issue with this was, I'm involved. I'm a top voice on LinkedIn. I'm involved in a lot of their advisory. Like, I never got an email telling me this. I was never given a heads up like, hey, as part of our new terms, we're defaulting into this. Would you like to participate? Anything like that. That to me is where I'm like, come on, LinkedIn, you missed the mark there. You should have given people a chance. Now, I understand why a lot of times companies don't want to, because especially right now, people jump to the nefarious. This is world domination. And so they assume all of this is bad and it's going to be used to exploit and all these things. And so I understand where a company gets put in this position of, if we ask people to opt in, nobody's going to opt in. And so then what? And I understand where the pressure can be, well, then let's maybe try and sneak this one by. But the problem is, if you look at the response of this on social, just people's general reactions to it, it's not positive at all. People are very upset about this, and they're not happy about the fact that, all their activity and everything they're doing on LinkedIn is now being used by default to train their AI models. So here's my feedback to everybody watching this or listening to this. If you're an active user of LinkedIn, even if you're a moderate user of LinkedIn, just take some time to think about the pros and the cons of whether you want your information being used to train the models. I personally am still weighing whether I'm going to turn it back on or not. I turned it off initially just to kind of think through, let me think about how this is being used. I'm following up with some people at LinkedIn because I kind of want to know how their data practices are and what the way they're approaching their models and all this stuff. I want some deeper questions answered before I just hand things over. But don't necessarily write it off and just say, no way am I going to do that because LinkedIn's going to create a, AI version of me, or, somebody somewhere is going to start posting things that are just like mine because they're going to steal my intellectual capital. That's just not the way AI works. It's like writing a book. You'd say, well, don't write a book because people might read it and they might take your ideas and then use them for their own purposes. Well, does that mean you shouldn't be an author? Well, no. But do you think carefully about authorship? Do you think carefully about how your, book is distributed and how it'll be used, and, people just not photocopying your book and distributing it? Like, yeah, you want to make sure that's not happening. And from what I can tell, that's not what LinkedIn is looking to do here. They're just trying to make their product better. But to the companies out there, I get why it's tempting to just want to sneak this by. Just don't. It's not a good look. Now, I'll walk you through, if you want to know, let's say you're listening to this and you want to take a similar approach that I did, and you want to say, you know what, I'm going to turn it off for now so that I can think about this and better understand how that data is going to be used. And I don't necessarily want everything going into their AI model. Then what you can do is you can go into your LinkedIn settings, and in data privacy, there is a new little line that says data for generative AI improvement. And you will see it's defaulted to on. You can go in, you can just flip it to off. Okay. And then they're not using your data for any of their training stuff. But again, like I said, I think there's some really good reasons why you would want to leave that on. And I actually am starting to lean towards flipping it back on, because a lot of the content I create and share on social media, I want to be the kind of content that is influencing and shaping the way that the AI models are assisting and helping people in the future. And while you might go, yeah, but then you're not going to get any money for it and all this, it's like, well, that's not why I'm doing it. It's not why I'm creating the content I create. So that's another thing that you have to consider. Are you, locking up your IP? Like, what's your approach to all this stuff? But I just wanted to, one, make people aware that this is happening so that they can be informed and make a choice of whether they want their data used for that, if you're a LinkedIn user or not. And then also represent that I think there's reasons to go in either direction. I don't think there's a right or wrong choice on this one, or that you're making a mistake if you go one direction versus the other. So hopefully that's helpful. And yeah, chances are you probably didn't know about it, because unless you saw some of the articles or something like that, they were very quiet about this one, which again, tech companies don't do that stuff. It's not a good look. All right. So next one. I wrote a post about this early this week because I was upset on this on a primal level. But then there's been some other happenings around it that has just kind of continued to formalize my thoughts around it. So I came across a USA. So let me start with this. The whole return to office thing is just like blowing up all over the place. I'm seeing it with Amazon. Their employees are rioting. You're seeing it with Starbucks. You're seeing it with all this stuff. And I feel a little bit like, why are we even back here? I really don't understand why we're having this conversation still. Like, anyway, but here's what happened. I came across this USA Today article that was titled, I don't remember the exact title of it, but it was a clickbaity title. And it was like, work from home employees say they're more efficient, but here's what they're really doing. And essentially, it was an article that basically took this survey that was done by SurveyMonkey of like 3,500 employees who were hybrid or remote, a very poorly designed survey. You can go find it if you want. And the survey was very poorly designed. And this article from USA Today did not represent the survey, but cherry-picked some of the data out of the survey to basically paint remote workers as these lazy, good-for-nothing employees who are taking naps and mowing their lawn and, just doing chores around the house all day and not getting any work done. And even the tone of the article was just extremely offensive. So I really was bothered by that because, first of all, one, if you listened to me for any period of time, these broad brush stereotypes just irritate me to the core because they are not an accurate representation of people. Like, it is not, there's so much data out there showing that work from home employees are not a bunch of people sitting on their couch watching Netflix, eating bonbons while they're, having Domino's delivered. It's just such a almost caricature stereotype that it's like, really, like, this is how we're still talking about this. So then you had the bad survey, you had the cherry pick data, and then you had this just gross stereotyping. But here's what actually, because I was talking to some people about it, and they said to me, they're like, well, you're kind of a big remote work advocate and you've worked from remote. Like, is maybe some of this just like defensiveness? And here was my response to that. And I'll just share it here. And this is what I would say to any leader who may still be wrestling with some of these biases or persistent beliefs about what people are doing when they're working from home. And what I said to this person was, I said, listen, I looked at the survey and I looked at every single category of things that this article called out. Like, can you believe it? They're doing non-work related activity. They're running errands. They're going to the bathroom. They're like, and it was like, I'm sorry, but literally one of the ones, they are taking 4% of people took a nap. And what bothered me so much about this was, surprise, folks, I haven't always been a remote worker. I've worked in the office for a good chunk of my career. And so I've been around the office. I've worked with people in the office. I know how offices work. I'm not like this remote worker who's like, what is an office? I've never done it before, and has all these positions and stereotypes of what I think that is. I've been in both environments. And here's the thing. Every single thing, it went like, nah, that's so bad. I've literally observed and even participated in the office. Like, are you kidding? People are finishing their Amazon order when they're in between meetings. They're checking their social media as they're in a meeting, because so many meetings, even if you're in the office, are in a Zoom. And even in conference rooms, sit around a conference room and peek over at your neighbor's laptop and watch what they're doing. I can promise you right now, good chunk of the time, it has nothing to do with work. And that's not me going, that's okay, but that's not me also going, oh, that's so terrible. How do we put a stop to this? The reality is, work is made up of people, and people are not machines. They don't just show up and do this one thing day in and day out, no rest, no break, no anything. In fact, data shows that when you try and make people perform that way, their performance falls through the floor. I mean, they literally just crater in terms of performance. So in fact, you don't want them operating this way. So let's just strip out the location. Let's just start with the fundamental issue of, oh, people are not 100% dedicated and focused on work all the time. Good. Believe me, if you're a leader and you don't agree that that's a good thing, I can send you about 15 research reports that'll show you this actually is a good thing. It fosters creativity. It fosters innovation. It fosters interpersonal relationships that actually drive business growth. Like, it is a very healthy, positive thing for the overall well-being of your employees, but also for your business. It's not one or the other. It's not like, oh, it's good for them, but it sucks for your business. No, it's actually good for everybody. So there's the fundamental underlying kind of bias that I think people have. But what starts to come out in this article is that, and we all are guilty of it, myself included, it's very easy for us to look at someone else doing something that maybe we personally wouldn't, like, let's say I've got 10 minutes between my meeting. I might choose to do this. Someone else might choose to do that. And chances are, if the both of us looked at how the two of us spent each other's meeting, there's a good chance one of us, we both would probably go, I don't know that that's really what you should be doing in between those meetings. That's probably not the best way to spend those 10 minutes. And it's nothing more than personal bias. It's just your own personal bias of, yeah, I would choose to use that 10 minutes to do this, or that 30 minutes that I would use to get lunch, I'm going to go work out. Somebody else is going to go get lunch. Somebody else is going to run to go take care of some errands. And everybody would be like, no, that's the right answer. And it's all based on your personal preference. It's not based on any quantitative data. It's not based on any actual performance data or anything. It's purely human bias. And so when all of a sudden you start exaggerating this into categories where you go, all right, we've already got this bias thing that has nothing to do with work, and now we're going to bucket it into two groups that we're going to pit against each other. There's these loyalists, the in-office people who truly are loyal to the company and do nothing but sit at their desk 100% focused on their work all the time. And then there's these, the hybrid remote employees over here who, oh, they're checking their social media and they're not working 100% of the time. Did you hear they folded some clothes when they had a break? Yuck. Like, stop it. It is literally using personal bias to pit groups of people against each other instead of saying, look, let's focus on performance outcomes. Let's focus on what needs to get done. Let's focus on if there is even a proximity component that requires something, then so be it. Right now, nobody's saying go pick up groceries, but don't ever go anywhere and don't ever have anybody go anywhere on your, they just make them vaporize and, like appear in front, like, duh. At some point, somebody's got to actually get the things. We know that. Let's move away from delivery trucks. Like, let's just have groceries show up at the store with it. We know that can't happen. That's not what we're talking about. But what we're talking about is in certain things where you go, is the work that is really being done, does it really matter? where it gets done? Or is it just important that it gets done in a certain way or with a certain outcome, not in a certain way? And I think that's the problem that we have. And that's where like the whole Starbucks thing, it just cracks me up that it's like, seriously, the CEO who's taking a private chartered jet back and forth to work every week, like who has private jets as Ubers? And then it's like, nah, you know what? We need people showing up into the office 5 days a week. Like, what? What? We're not even on the same planet here. And so I think my encouragement for folks is to, one, just be more aware of the difference between things that matter for performance and things that are your personal bias. Like truly, if you care more about whether a person chooses to spend that extra time they have in between things to change their kids' diapers or spend 10 minutes watching the news in the office break room, like that's a you problem. And you've got to do the work to figure that out. You can't say, well, we just need to make a world of workers that all choose to come into the office and they would choose to spend their time staring at, CNBC or Fox News in the corporate break room, having the water cooler conversations versus taking care of folding the laundry quick in between meetings. Like that's a you problem. And you've got to get over that. And you've got to get over that by first believing these things are personal preferences. They are not tied to performance outcomes. And you actually need the diversity to thrive as a business. Lacking that, you can build a company with nothing but a bunch of people who all think, look, and act like you do. And they all go to the break room for water cooler conversations and they say the same things and spend the same amount of time. And guess what? Your company's going to fall through the floor because it's not going to perform well compared to the ones that say, oh, you change diapers during the break? I watch CNBC during the break. I go run my errands and do this. And we come back and we come together and we work on problems and we solve things. It's just really, to me, too bad that I feel like we're regressing in the world of work right now when, right into the pandemic, all of a sudden it started to seem like companies were realizing, hey, maybe we actually can celebrate different ways of doing things and be innovative and embrace people who all think, look, and act differently. And then all of a sudden now we're like, nah, that was kind of like a trend. We're kind of past that. We're kind of past the whole equity and inclusion. We're kind of past the whole flexible working. We're going to kind of go back to how it was before. And to me, we're falling back into some really bad habits. So there you go. That's my take on that. Moving on. I get feisty on this one. So then the other one, speaking of falling back, okay, this is an AI related one that is to me extremely disappointing. If you have not seen, this all came from I can't remember if it was like a leaked thing that came out of OpenAI or something like this, but something came out about how much water it actually takes to power these supercomputers to generate 100 words for a single user. It's like 3 water bottles. That's how much water it's consuming to cool these energy, hungry processing machines. So 100 words consumes 3 bottles of water. And then I was looking into it more and was reading into some of how we're actually backsliding in some of our dependency on fossil fuels, because all of these data centers, all of these, powerhouses that need all this energy that we didn't need before are going, well, we got to do it. And so where are we going? Well, we're going back to fossil fuels because we got to burn something to increase power capacity and output. And we haven't really innovated in the way we generate energy. And so now we just need to do more. And so what seems like innovation, it's coming from somewhere. And I think this is some of the principles of economics on an even bigger scale, which is you don't create things from nothing. There's only one being who creates things from nothing, and that's God. And we are not God. So when we create new things, we're pulling from somewhere else. We're sacrificing in other areas. And this is now raising major concerns for people because they're going, wait a minute, how much are we actually draining our natural resources for this. Like, okay, I think it's super helpful that ChatGPT can help me come up with a recipe with what's in my fridge. But at what cost is this thing that I probably could have spent a few minutes figuring out myself if I really needed to, and with not a whole lot of work? Like, it was convenient and I like it, but I just liked it because I didn't think it was costing anything. Well, now it turns out, holy crap, this is having some significant costs on our already strained environment. And, I've heard the arguments. I've engaged in some of them myself with people who are like, yeah, 3 water bottles, it just cools it. They just recycle the water. It's not like it's sitting pouring, natural resources all over these coolants. And I'm like, in some ways, there's some truth to that. So that's where like the extremists, the like freak out, alarmists that, oh my gosh, we're going to melt all the ice caps by 2027 because we're going to be pouring all our fresh water on data centers and there's going to be no water left and we're all going to die of dehydration in the next 3 years. It's like, okay, no, let's not jump to that. And so, yes, I understand it's concerning when you hear, wait, 100 words for one user cost 3 water bottles? Like, that's insane. That's a lot of water. True. Does that necessarily mean we need to completely freak out and think that we're all going to die of dehydration in the next 3 years? No, but the increase in use of fossil fuels, the increase in use of just energy as a whole, the increase in use of clean water, because I'll tell you right now, you can't cool computer components with salt water. So, yeah, I mean, it is concerning. And so does that mean we're probably going to have to look into different ways to do this, ways to innovate so we don't just keep robbing ourselves of the resources we need to survive? But yeah, I would say this is going to push some of those concerns, because I think most people were not even aware of this. Based on some of the conversations I had and some of the meetings I've been involved with where this has come up, there were a ton of people that were like, I had no idea. And I've talked about before things like, how do you think data gets trained in AI? People are exploited for, terrible wages and exposed to horrific things so that we get the convenience of this thing spitting out a cute little response when we say, can you generate a song that is in the voice of Abe Lincoln about chopping down a cherry tree? Or I guess that's George Washington. But you get my point. Like these cutesy things, and we're like, yeah, it's so fun. And we're like, yeah, but at what cost? And is this something we really need? Now, don't take my response to this to me being like, I'm starting to shift and be anti-AI. No, I'm not. I think there's tremendous things that we can be doing with this, and it can improve things for the better. But I think we need to, similar to my point about LinkedIn's opt-in stuff, we need to have more informed, holistic decisions being made rather than just, hey, can we make AI more powerful? Yeah, you bet. We can make AI more powerful. Is that what you want? Sure. Yeah, make it more powerful. No, what we should be doing is saying, hey, could we make AI more powerful? Well, in theory, yes, we could. But let's talk about what would go into that and what are the trade-offs and what might we need to do to make that happen? And what gaps do we have in the current ecosystem that we would need to close to be able to do this without ultimately destroying ourselves by going down this path? And maybe let's discuss, is the extra horsepower really worth the trade-offs? And maybe we decide at this point, they're not. Maybe we don't need GPT 02. Maybe we don't need Cloud Anthropic Sonnet, whatever 4.7. Maybe we could just be okay with where we are till we figure out some of these things. Like last week where I talked about the $2,000 fusion generator that a college kid created. Like, hey, maybe let's let some of this other stuff catch up so we can close some of these other gaps. Maybe let's get some of these things under control before we go, let's just keep pushing this thing as hard and far as we possibly can and see what happens. And I think that's just the kind of conversations that we need to have more of, which unfortunately, going back to my original point with Copilot 2.0, AI is not going to encourage those kinds of conversations. And this is why, going to point 3, we need diverse people in a room who have differing perspectives, differing priorities, different experiences coming together, because you're going to have one person who goes, yeah, heck yeah, we need more power out of AI. And you're going to have someone else who goes, well, but hang on a second. Like, my concern is the environment. And I think we need to address the fact that for every 100 words today, it's consuming 3 bottles of water. What does that scale up to if we go to model, 4.7? Where does that go? And what kind of power demands is that going to need? What kind of increase? And then the other person goes, well, what is this about progress? And we go, well, it is. And I'm open to that, but let's discuss this. And then somebody else in the room is going, yeah, I'm a little concerned about the mental health of people and where this is going. And people go, well, shoot, we hadn't thought about that. And that's why we need these diverse, robust discussions about these things, instead of, some crazy CEO who just goes, this at all costs. And everybody just goes, okay, well, I hope we don't break anything in the process. And so I think that's where these concerns are continuing to pop up. And I'm really interested to see where they go and what we choose to do with them. And I think they can all be solved for. That's the thing. If a kid can make a $2,000 fusion generator, we can figure out better ways to handle these power issues. We can probably figure out ways to engineer cooling devices that are better at cooling, that maybe don't require 3 bottles of fresh water for every 100 words generated. Or maybe we find more efficient things. Like, there's ways to solve this, but often we're in such a hurry to just get to the finish line. We don't care. And we're like, it's not my problem to deal with, until it is. And that's what I continue to find more and more today, is people are already starting to feel the impact of this stuff. And it's a lot messier to clean up than it was to make. Okay. Now the last one. This one is one I've talked about a couple times, but I watched a video trailer. There's a documentary coming out. It's called Eternal You. And I'd encourage you to go check out. You can see the trailer on YouTube or whatever. But what this whole documentary is about, and it's something that I've talked about a few times and something I predicted was coming long before it got here, was how we were going to use technology not to prevent death, but to almost try and make it so that people live on forever. And so this documentary is interviewing and talking to the companies and the people who have been involved in some of these very advanced, I don't even know what they're calling them. It's like death bots. And essentially what they are is, like, you can now see it's crazy some of the stuff you can do. If you want to do this, you can go, let's say, and I'll run you through how this could work. Let's say I wanted to create an eternal, and I use that in air quotes because I would say it's not eternal, but an eternal version of Christopher. And I could go get 3D scanned. I could, have that 3D scan turn into a full 3D model of me. I could have my voice cloned. I could have it learn my mannerisms, my behavior. I could have it trained on all of my content. It would go through a whole series of questions to gather as much information as humanly possible about me. And in essence, for the right amount of money, they could create a eternal digital version of me that could then be handed off to my kids, my wife, whatever, so that I never have to die. I'm with them forever. Now, the part that is weird to me about this is that the whole documentary is interviewing the survivors, which I almost think is ironic that the whole thing is kind of being tagged as the end of mortality. And you're like, what are you talking about? If you're the one having all this done to you, you're still dead. Just as an FYI, you can go get cloned, you can go get scanned, you can go get an AI large language model of you built up. You will still be dead, even if your family members feel like you're not dead. So to me, that's kind of part of the irony of this, is like, who's doing this, that they're going, hey, I'll live on forever, but I won't really. But if you see some of the marketing in this stuff, they really walk that line of like trying to even almost convince you that no, it's actually you. Like, we'll create you. It's like, it's not you. Spoiler alert, it's not you. But it was also interesting digging more into it. And I've even seen some of this, and there's a fair amount of data starting to come out about this as people are sharing their stories and their experiences with what seemed like a really good idea on the surface. And my heart goes out to people. Again, if you followed me for any period of time, I grew up in the funeral home, grew up around funeral, I grew up around death. So I am intimately familiar with the heartbreak that comes along with the loss of a loved one. It's not something to scoff at. It's not something to dismiss and just go, oh, so stupid. People would want to make a clone of their dead loved ones. Like, no, I fully understand where the pain and the grief and the desire and just the emptiness that comes when the loss of a loved one hits, why people would be so desperate to say, but what if I didn't have to deal with that? What if I didn't have to experience that? What if I could live on with them forever and they'd be with me? And it was interesting how almost all the people I saw in some of the stories I've interviewed, and even the data that I've looked into on this, I could almost predict it. So I'd be curious if anybody here has any actual, if you've done it, please reach out. I'd love to hear your experience. But I've seen a consistent pattern with these stories, and it's almost to a point of predictability where the person goes into it. They see this as such a good for them because they don't want to deal with grief. They don't want to deal with the loss. And I understand that grief sucks. Like, grief is not a fun thing. When you talk about the grieving process, it's not like something you look forward to. So I understand why people want to avoid it. And people will go to, some of the lengths I've seen people go to avoid dealing with grief. I mean, I get it. I get how far people are willing to go, but it always starts there. They lost a child too young, which is tragic. I've got many friends who have lost children at young ages, and it's heartbreaking. I mean, it's just terrible. And so you got that. You've got, people who've been married for decades and decades and decades, and they just don't know how to go on without their loved one. You got, whatever. I mean, those are extreme circumstances, but you can even see how, just in general, it would be very tempting because loss sucks. And the pattern is very similar. They have these reasons. They feel like they don't know how to move forward. And this seems like a really easy path to solve it. Granted, it's expensive, can be very expensive, but people will pay money when they're desperate for things. And unfortunately, people will take your money if they know you're desperate. And so there's lots of these companies out there that see this just as an opportunity to go, great. And there's a consistent pattern of people that go, yeah, they really seemed like they wanted to support me and help me, deal with my grief and move forward with my life, and to do that without having to sacrifice the actual loss of a loved one. And going back to the things I've said throughout this earlier, life economics doesn't work that way. You don't get to skip the grief and loss that comes with the death of a loved one. You just don't get to skip it. It sucks, but you don't get to skip it. And somebody promising you, hey, you just give us enough money, you get to skip this. I mean, hello. You know my worldview. There is an ancient text that talks about this at length, how far we will go to try and skip the inevitable path and the consequences that we reap when we do. And it was really heartbreaking to even just in some of the stories. I don't think that the documentary actually releases till mid next year or something like that. But you could just see in the clips and then in some of the articles related to this, the pain that these people went through when they bought the story that I get to skip out on this and I'll just move forward and my life will be great and it'll be as though nothing ever happened. And then how much worse it is when things either go sideways. One, story is of how this ghost bot turned, and it really messed with this person. And I know someone who had this same experience. The ghost bot went rogue and it completely destroyed them. Because what happened is you start to build this emotional attachment with this bot that isn't really the person. But then because the bot is carrying forward, you can't separate the two. And so when the bot starts going sideways or doing things it was never supposed to do, or that person would never do, you can't separate it and go, oh, this isn't real. This is just the AI bot. So it's malfunctioning, oh, it's haunting me. Oh, it's actually decided it hates me and it regrets ever being married to me or wishing it had a different family. No, that's not real. It's like, no, now all the positive memories, you're robbed of those because now this thing has taken them from you. And so it really, I'm looking forward to checking it out. But I think this is going to be a very booming industry because people hate death. They hate death, they hate grief, and people will pay a lot of money to have that taken away, or at least believe that they can have that taken away and not have to deal with it. So again, for folks, if you're out there, if you're considering this stuff, if you're like, oh, isn't it harmless? Wouldn't it just be nice to have like, the advanced voice mode of OpenAI, where I could just talk to my loved one, and just stay in touch. Like, have a conversation with them now and record it. Like, honestly, these are the steps that I would encourage to people now. If you think you've got a loved one who you're going to lose or whatever, like go have the conversations now, record them now so you can listen back to them later. Spend time with them now. Don't get so wrapped up with your work and your life. You're not spending time with the people that matter to you most so that you end up having to be desperate and creating a fake copy of them to hopefully bridge whatever gaps that you thought, you should have closed. It's not worth it. And it really breaks my heart to know there are a lot of people already who are getting hurt by this technology, and it's only going to get worse. And I can tell you right now, there's not going to be an upside to this. There's not. It's just going to be a matter of, is there enough longitudinal data to show it? And that's what I think is going to happen. You're going to see people, you're going to have lots of like happy stories on the 3-month, 6-month marker where people are like, this is great. Yeah. Follow those same people for the next 5 years and see what happens. And I can tell you, it's not going to be positive. So with that, be careful, folks. Technology is great, but it can also completely destroy you. So with that, that's all I've got this week. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week and a wonderful weekend, and we will see you on the other side.